Have I ever told you about the time when I recorded the really hard dungeon pulls video and I brought a group through the first Gigapull and Stone Vigil, including the boss, and after we had actually succeeded it, I said, can we do that again? I forgot to hit record. Escort quest, done dungeon challenge. In a dungeon where killing all the mobs is not actually a requirement to proceed, choose one of the mobs in the first viable pull, mark it, and escort it through the entire dungeon. That is the challenge we're doing here. And we choose, of course, one of the bats in this first pull as our escort quest in Sastasha. Now, the expanded rules to avoid people cheesing or cheating. 1. The escort target must be aggro to the tank at all times, so you can't just pass it on to the healer, removing the mob from danger. 2. Crowd control on the escort target is illegal, so you're not allowed to sleep, stun, slow, or bind it or anything else in any way. Additionally, where relevant, the mob has to actually be escorted by you, so bugging out the mob so it can't follow you is not allowed, and in dungeons with sections that would cut it off, you would have to pick up a new escort quest as you progress. For the curious, the origin of this idea came from the fact that, in Copperbell Mines, a lot of the enemies in the first section of the duty reset as you run far enough past them, which then led to the question of, is that the case in other A Realm Reborn dungeons? And what better way to test that than to escort a bat through all of Sastasha? Not only is Sastasha a dungeon that doesn't require you to kill non-boss enemies to proceed, but it is very long in length, so if the mob would reset, this would probably be the dungeon it would happen in. So for our group composition, we have me and Shaq as Vibrant Samurai, both jobs with 0 AoE options and reasonably strong GCDs and auto attacks. This is because, with the presence of the escort quest, AoE attacks are simply too dangerous to use at all, as that bat is so fragile that a breeze could hurt it. For healing, Naomi is playing Scholar, which is obviously by far the strongest pick for this dungeon, due to EOS. And finally, Milo is playing Gunbreaker, which, incidentally, happens to be the strongest pick as well thanks to Brutal Shell being available. Now, before we get too deep in the dungeon, I want to mention that the game plan is to escort this bat through the entire dungeon, or, if it does reset, replace it with a different mob where it resets, just to finish the challenge. With that said, do you think the bat will reset? And if so, about when? And with these initial details out of the way, let's take the play-by-play. As we can't really AoE, Milo is electing to only pull a few packs at a time, pulling the 3 first packs. Already at the very start, we start to work on careful ways to avoid hurting the escort bat. Instead of tap targeting through enemies, completely untarget or even sheath weapons to make sure an auto attack doesn't sneak through as you look for a new target. A danger that also quickly emerged is the possibility of hurting the escort bat with an attack because of your current target dying just as you initiate the attack. Right as this first big pull finishes, Shaq manages to land a Jinpu on the escort bat, dealing nearly 20% of its HP, just like that. As we continue into the large cave area, another little observation is that once you heal the tank or accidentally hit the bat, you're now permanently in combat for the remainder of the dungeon, which, had it been a higher level dungeon, could be a problem for the healer's MP. Maybe. A particular pull in this cave area that can be scary is the Jerk Anglerfish, as it has the ability to buff the attack damage of nearby mobs for a bit. Now, whether that boost is actually significant tends to come down to how many mobs are actually alive and how long they live with that buff. But since we can't AoE at all, it could have been an issue. In your average group, the reason why gigapulling from the start of the dungeon all the way to the switch tends to be fine is because as long as the party is attacking at all, most of the mobs you pull will die as you run along, so by the time you get to either the anglerfish or the boss area, most of the packs will be gone anyway. This does take longer when everyone has to carefully hit around the escort bat. Also, remember that the note on the first side track at the start of the dungeon tells us which coral is the correct one to enable the switch. That said, the toolkits of our jobs here are quite interesting despite being so basic. Viper has both of their starter combos, and Hunter Sting for the damage buff. Samurai has both of their buff combo steps. which gives a Viper rotation of 1121 and a Samurai rotation of 1213. Naomi mentioned they did not need to use Physic a single time, so it is safe to assume their toolkit boiled down to 200 potency bios and 150 potency ruin casts. Milo had a bit more, with defensive cooldowns as well as Keen Edge, No Mercy, Brutal Shell and Lightning Shot. While Demon Slice was available, the observation of how fragile the Escort bat was really emphasized how dangerous it would be to AoE at all, although it was used a few times. Since everyone else was just single targeting and EOS does not generate any enmity, as long as we hit Milo's target, it wasn't too big of a deal either. I'd also argue that Chopper here was the second easiest fight in the duty, since it being just one opponent minimized the chance we would hurt the Escort bat. We continue past the large cave area and move straight to the next boss with the patrol on us. As we're back to many enemies at once, you can see how us needing to be careful with what we're hitting does slow down our damage considerably, as we need to make sure we only damage our desired target. I carefully check and double check my target is safe to attack before using a GCD. I even sometimes both step out of melee range and on target before choosing something new to hit, to be safe and not risk any auto attacks. As I mentioned, you can also cancel auto attacking by sheathing your weapon, but I just prefer to be extra safe. As we finish up the boss, I think we all forgot that he just suddenly becomes untargetable, as we all got a heart attack from this. And at this point, the Escort bat has 2/3 of its HP remaining. Primarily, if not exclusively thanks to random auto attacks after the initial Jinpu at the start of the dungeon. The many shallow tail mobs in this section being a bit tankier, some even being ranged, kind of makes it easier for us as we can more safely do proper damage to them. Around this time, Milo also mentions a trick for the tank to choose targets. I believe this could be relevant due to playing on a controller. Untarget, and then just wait until you auto-target something safe, and hit that. We also had points here where there were safe to attack mobs that were left alone for surprisingly long with enough HP to die from exactly one hit, but no one dared to take the chance, in case someone else would do it too. It is particularly funny these stalemates happened so frequently, considering we were in voice chat. The Big Reaver is actually one of the scariest mobs in the dungeon. Normally. Or rather, not even normally. In a solo situation, I suppose. At minimum item level, he can insta-kill a healer if he gets an auto attack lined up with his heavy swing just right with a crit. But you can also just kite him. As we close in on the third boss fight, I'd almost suggest we could have had 2 or even 3 or 4 bats as our escort. I wonder how that would have gone. On the third boss, someone accidentally auto-swings the Escort bat, leaving it below 62%. But as we continue our careful attacks, the scurvy dog pack isn't even a major issue, as we clean up and make our way to the final room in the dungeon. This bigger room is another part of the dungeon that can get a bit scary. This is because the various shallow tails have each their own way of doing damage, if you let them. The archers of course shoot, the pugilists hit faster than normal, and the gladiators use fast blades sometimes for extra surprise damage. At this point we're also discussing the surprising difficulty of this challenge. Somehow, this is both easier and harder than expected. It is a lot easier to do the dungeon escorting a single mob through the whole thing than expected. Simultaneously, the bat is a lot more fragile than we expected, so it feels a bit like carrying an egg by hand down the street. The wrong move cracks and breaks the egg, but the likelihood of that move happening is relatively small. And then comes the final boss, and the Escort bat follows us in, so we can at least conclude here that in Sastasha, it seems like mobs just don't reset, aside from mobs that cannot chase you, like the clams. As we finish up this boss, a funny detail that happens here is that I'm pretty sure I am the only person not in combat with the Escort bat. Maybe Naomi isn't either, since EOS doesn't generate enmity. But due to the rules of the challenge, Milo is in combat with it, and Shaq hit it by accident at least once. And due to this weird circumstance, we managed to still have some players in combat as the duty completes. Which means we get to see what happens if we try to exit the dungeon while still in combat. First, Milo leaves, causing the bat to instantly swap to Shaq. As Shaq leaves, the bat gets confused, targeting triple question marks, but might be trying to target Naomi or something through EOS, I don't know. But when Naomi leaves, the color of the bat swaps from red, hostile, to pink, which means an enemy engaged in combat, but if I recall correctly, quote-unquote, not with you. A moment later, since I'm not in combat with it, it disengages combat and flies back home, recovering about 10% HP per tick. So first of all, are you surprised at all that the Escort bat didn't reset at all throughout the dungeon? And second of all, what do you think of this challenge? Do you think it looks like fun? Do you think it needs a little more to be interesting? Like, I could imagine escorting more mobs. In fact, we initially dismissed the idea of a semi-pacifist run of only killing necessary mobs. We dismissed it because we concluded it would be too hard, but looking at this, maybe we could make it with a few packs. Like, maybe the first 3 packs could be manageable. On the other hand, full pacifist would also enable the tank to just run away with all the mobs we want to avoid killing, making it more survivable. An obvious limitation of this challenge is that due to most dungeons after A Realm Reborn, if not all dungeons, requiring you kill all the mobs in each sector of the dungeon before proceeding to the next, this challenge pretty much only really works in A Realm Reborn dungeons. Still, it could be pretty funny to see how much you could get away with. I imagine another way to make it more challenging would be to intentionally choose less optimal jobs for the task. Do let me know what you think in the comments. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, it has changed a bit back and forth, but in A Realm Reborn, the way gear took durability damage was either by dying or by receiving experience. Yes, even at max level, which meant that killing mobs damaged your gear rather than mobs attacking you. This led to extremely wacky dungeon optimizations which involved having the tank pull everything and just letting themselves die once the party reached the boss room, so the party could avoid fighting or killing anything, then rest the tank and thus save on repairs. This would probably also be a faster way to do more recent dungeons, if not for the walls in the dungeons, so at least we get to fight the packs.